My name is Helena Marlowe, and I am 62 years old. For most of my life, I believed that family meant safety, that no matter how rough the world became, the people you raised and sacrificed for would never turn their backs on you. I was wrong. I grew up the daughter of a factory worker and a Sunday school teacher in the South. They taught me to keep my head down, work twice as hard, and give my whole heart to the people I loved. And I did. Every breath I took was for my family. I worked nights scrubbing the same office floors year after year, my hands raw from bleach, my knees aching from kneeling too long. I made sure my children never went to bed hungry, even if it meant I did. I braided my daughter's hair before dawn, packed lunches from scraps, skipped doctor's appointments because the bills had to be paid first. I told myself it would all be worth it, that one day my children would see the woman who had built their world out of nothing and they would be proud of me. That one day I wouldn't just be their mother, but their home. That day never came. One rainy afternoon, my phone lit up with a single text from my daughter, Madeline. It said, "Don't come tonight. Vanessa doesn't want you here. It's better for everyone." 40 years of love and sacrifice, erased with 12 words on a cracked phone screen. I stood in my kitchen, my hands trembling, the smell of cornbread burning in the oven, and felt something inside me snap. I realized that blood doesn't guarantee love, and devotion doesn't earn you a place in someone's life if they've already decided you're disposable. This is not a story about anger, though I've known plenty of that. It's not even about sadness, though it has drowned me more times than I can count. This is a story about what happens when a woman is cast out by the very people she gave everything to, and how she rises from the ashes they left behind. I was 20 when I married David Marlowe. Back then I believed love could survive anything, even poverty. We had nothing but a second-hand couch, a mattress on the floor, and big dreams we couldn't afford to chase. David promised me we'd build something together. But it didn't take long before I realized the building would rest on my back alone. By the time I was 24, I had 2 children and 3 jobs. I worked mornings at a diner, afternoons cleaning houses, and nights as a janitor for Parker & Sons Manufacturing. My hands were always cracked, my shoes always damp, but I kept telling myself, this is what a good mother does. A good mother breaks herself into pieces so her children can feel whole. David started staying out late. He said it was for work, but I knew the truth. Even then, I didn't complain. I thought keeping quiet would hold the family together. In our community, Black women like me were taught to endure, to keep smiling no matter how heavy the load got, because falling apart wasn't an option. Falling apart meant everything around you fell too. When Travis, my firstborn, started school, I'd stand at the window just to watch him walk down the street with his little backpack, my heart swelling with pride. I didn't care that my own clothes were worn out or that I hadn't bought anything for myself in years. Seeing my children safe, fed, and cared for, that was my reward. But even in those early years, I saw the cracks forming. David's family treated me like an outsider, a girl from the wrong side of town who'd trapped their son. They never said it to my face, but the way they looked at me said enough. I swallowed it all, thinking one day they'd understand the kind of woman I was. I didn't know it yet, but every moment of silence, every insult I let slide, every time I erased myself for the sake of peace, I was teaching my children something. I thought I was teaching them love, but maybe I was teaching them that my love came cheap, that I was willing to pay for their affection with my dignity. And decades later, they'd learned that lesson a little too well. Children don't stop loving you overnight. It happens slowly, so slowly you almost don't see it happening. But looking back, I can tell you exactly when the distance began to grow. Travis was 13, the first time he looked at me with embarrassment instead of love. It was after a school event, a parent meeting where most of the moms showed up in neat dresses, their nails painted, hair fresh from the salon. I came straight from work, my uniform smelling faintly of bleach and sweat, my hands dry and rough from scrubbing floors all day. Travis barely met my eyes. When his friend asked who I was, he muttered, "Just my mom," like he wished I were someone else. I laughed it off then, made a joke about how he'd understand one day. But inside, a small ache took root. Madeline was different. She clung to me longer, even when the world around her tried to tell her my love wasn't enough. But by the time she hit high school, Vanessa had entered the picture. My son's future wife didn't hide her contempt. She was young, pretty, full of sharp smiles and sharper words. She'd whisper little things when she thought I wasn't listening, about my clothes, my job, my lack of class. And Travis, my own flesh and blood, laughed along with her. Family dinners changed after that. I stopped being Mom and started being Helena. They corrected my grammar, rolled their eyes when I prayed too long before meals, told me I should try to fit in more. I told myself it was just growing pains, that kids push their mothers away before they come back. But deep down, I felt it. The love I had poured into them was leaking out, and I couldn't stop it. The hardest part wasn't the words they said. It was the ones they didn't. No thank you for the late nights. No apology for the stares that made me small. Just silence. A silence that grew heavier with every passing year, until one day it felt like a wall between us. And walls, once built, are hard to tear down. Birthdays stopped being a celebration for me years ago. I used to bake my own cake, even if nobody remembered. I'd make it simple, vanilla, nothing fancy, and light a single candle just to remind myself that my life still counted for something. The year I turned 58, I dared to hope things would be different. Madeline had promised to stop by. She said she had a surprise for me, and for a moment I let myself imagine that maybe, finally, my daughter wanted to spend time with me. I cooked all afternoon. Fried chicken, collard greens, macaroni and cheese, the food she used to beg for when she was a little girl. I even wore the yellow dress she once called her favorite, even though it fit tighter than it used to. I sat at the table waiting. The clock ticked past 6, past 7, past 8. Finally, my phone buzzed. My hands shook as I reached for it. A text from Madeline. "Sorry, Mom. Vanessa says it's not a good idea for you to come tonight. We're going out with friends. Maybe next time." 12 words. That's all it took to erase me. I stared at the message until the screen went black. The food on the table grew cold. Outside, I could hear my neighbors laughing, their families gathering in warm living rooms, while mine had cast me out without a second thought. I wanted to cry, to scream, to demand an explanation. But instead, I cleaned up the table, packed the food into containers I knew I'd eat alone, and sat in the quiet of my kitchen with only the hum of the refrigerator for company. That night, something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a hollow, aching realization. No matter how much I loved them, my children had decided that I was someone to be hidden, someone to be ashamed of. And I didn't know it then. But that was the first step toward letting go of the dream I had clung to my entire life. That love could not only be given, but returned. I stopped looking forward to family gatherings. At first, I kept showing up because that's what mothers do. We forgive, we show up, we hope. But each time I walked through their doors, I felt myself shrinking a little more. The last Thanksgiving I attended at Travis's house is burned into my memory. Vanessa greeted me with a tight smile, the kind people use when they're doing something out of obligation. She barely let me step inside before pointing out my shoes, old, worn, scuffed from years of janitorial work. She said, "Maybe next time you can dress up a little. It's a holiday after all." Loud enough for everyone to hear. I laughed it off, even though my face burned hot. I offered to help in the kitchen, but Vanessa refused, saying I'd just be in the way. So I sat alone at the end of the table, watching my own children laugh and share stories like I wasn't there. They passed dishes to each other, skipped me more than once, as if including me was optional. Every time I opened my mouth to speak, Travis interrupted or changed the subject. Madeline barely looked at me, too busy checking her phone, smiling at texts I'd never receive. By the time dessert was served, I understood something painfully clear. They didn't see me as family anymore. I was an obligation, a guest they couldn't quite get rid of, a shadow sitting quietly in a room full of light that no longer reached me. That night I went home with leftovers I hadn't asked for, shoved into foil like a pity offering. I sat on my couch, opened the foil, and stared at the cold pie in my lap. My own son, my own daughter, had made me feel like a stranger in the life I had built for them. And I started to wonder if the greatest mistake of my life was not the sacrifices I made for them, but the way I kept sacrificing myself long after they had stopped asking me to. For a long time I thought silence was strength, that holding my pain-ins made me noble, that swallowing humiliation made me a good mother. But one night, I saw myself clearly for the first time in decades, and I barely recognized the woman staring back. It was late, past midnight, after another long shift at Parker & Sons. My uniform still smelled like disinfectant. My back was screaming and my feet ached so badly I could hardly bend down to take off my shoes. I walked past the mirror in the hallway and stopped. I hadn't really looked at myself in years, not properly. My hair was thinning around the edges where I'd tied it too tight for too long. My skin was tired, my eyes dull like the light had gone out a long time ago. I didn't see Helena, the young dreamer who once thought love could fix everything. I saw a ghost of a woman who had given everything she had and been left with nothing in return. And for the first time, a thought entered my mind that I had never dared to think. What if I stopped begging for their love? What if I started loving myself instead? That thought scared me. It felt wrong, selfish even. I'd spent my whole life putting everyone else first. But standing there, staring at the stranger in the mirror, I realized I had been disappearing piece by piece. And if I didn't change something soon, there would be nothing left of me at all. That night, I made a quiet promise. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know where it would lead, but I swore to myself I would stop waiting for anyone to save me. I would try, just try, to save myself. The promise I made to myself that night didn't change my life overnight. Habits built over decades don't break in a day. But something inside me had shifted, a quiet determination, whispering that my story wasn't over yet. The first thing I did was sign up for night classes at the local community center. It felt ridiculous at first. A 60-year-old woman walking into a classroom full of strangers, clutching a cheap notebook like a child on her first day of school. My hands trembled when I wrote my name on the sign-in sheet. I almost turned around and left, but I stayed. We started with the basics: computer literacy, bookkeeping, a few lessons on business fundamentals. Sitting there under those harsh fluorescent lights, I felt my brain come alive in a way it hadn't in years. I wasn't just a mother or a housekeeper or a woman people could look past. I was Helena again, a woman who could learn, who could grow, who could still dream even after decades of being told she wasn't worth much. Some nights, exhaustion hit me so hard I thought about quitting. I'd finish my janitorial shift, my knees throbbing, and drag myself to class. Sometimes I fell asleep at the desk, only to wake up embarrassed. But every time, I reminded myself why I was there. I wasn't doing this for Travis or Madeline. I wasn't doing this to make Vanessa respect me. I was doing it because I refused to let their rejection be the final word on my life. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something I thought had died in me: hope. And I decided that no matter how long it took, no matter how hard it got, I would rebuild myself from the ground up, even if I had to do it alone. Change doesn't come with a bang. Sometimes it tiptoes in quietly, disguised as little victories that nobody else notices. But you do. 6 months into my night classes, I updated my resume for the first time in decades. It was nothing fancy, just a single sheet of paper listing years of cleaning, managing schedules, handling supplies, fixing things nobody else wanted to bother with. I almost didn't send it anywhere. Who would hire a 60-year-old woman with nothing but a lifetime of invisible work to her name? But one afternoon, the manager of a small logistics firm called me in for an interview. I sat in the waiting room surrounded by younger candidates in crisp suits, my hands sweating, convinced I didn't belong there. But when I walked in and the manager asked me how I handled pressure, I didn't give him theory. I gave him truth. I told him about the nights I'd cleaned 20 offices alone, the emergencies I'd solved without anyone ever saying thank you, the way I'd learned to make order out of chaos because my life depended on it. I left that room certain I hadn't impressed him. 2 days later, he offered me the job. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. An operations assistant, a real office job, my first time working with a computer instead of a mop. The first paycheck felt like more than money. It felt like proof that I still had something to give the world, something beyond sacrifice. I bought myself a decent pair of shoes, not because anyone would notice, but because I wanted to feel like I belonged somewhere for once. And slowly, I noticed something else changing. I stood taller. My voice grew steadier. When I looked in the mirror, the woman staring back wasn't a ghost anymore. She was Helena Marlowe, a woman climbing out of the hole life had thrown her into, one small step at a time. For the first time in years, I believed the best part of my story might still be ahead of me. The logistics firm wasn't glamorous. We weren't building skyscrapers or closing million-dollar deals. But for me, it was the first place in decades where my ideas mattered. At first, I kept my head down, afraid of making mistakes. I thought they'd treat me like everyone else always had, like background noise, a worker who does the job and disappears. But then came a moment that changed everything. One morning, a delivery system went haywire. Orders were getting lost, trucks were late, and the office was in chaos. People were panicking, shouting over each other. I remembered the years I'd spent juggling schedules as a janitor, handling 10 different emergencies at once without anyone noticing. So I stepped in. I reorganized the routes, made quick calls to drivers, fixed what everyone thought was unfixable, and I did it in an hour. The next day, my manager pulled me into his office. I braced myself, thinking I'd overstepped. Instead, he said, "Helena, you saved us thousands yesterday. How would you feel about taking on more responsibility?" More responsibility meant more hours, more pay, and more influence. Within a year, I wasn't just an assistant. I was running operations, leading a team of people half my age, making decisions that kept the company alive. The CEO started calling me into meetings, asking for my opinion. For the first time in my life, I had a seat at a table where my voice mattered. I couldn't help but think of all the dinners I'd sat through with my own children, silent and invisible, wishing they'd see me. Now strangers saw me, respected me, trusted me. It didn't erase the pain my family caused. That ache never really left, but it showed me something I'd never truly believed before. I wasn't worthless. I wasn't a burden. I had been powerful all along. No one had ever given me a chance to prove it. And now that I had my foot in the door, I promised myself one thing. I was never going back to the woman they could ignore. 3 years after I first walked into that office, everything changed again. By then, I wasn't just an employee. I was running half the company's operations. I'd saved them money, built better systems, and turned a struggling department into the heart of the business. One Friday morning, the CEO called me into his office. I thought it was just another strategy meeting, but instead, he said words I never imagined I'd hear at 62 years old. "Helena, we want you to become a partner. You've earned your seat at this table. This company wouldn't be standing without you." I walked out of that office in a daze. For years, I'd been the woman no one wanted around. Now, I was a part owner of a company that saw my worth, a place where my voice carried weight. For the first time in my life, I had power. Not the kind that controls people, but the kind that comes from finally knowing who you are. News of my success traveled fast. Within weeks, my phone started buzzing with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years, old acquaintances, distant relatives, and then my children. Madeline called first. Her voice was sweet, too sweet, like honey masking something sour. She said she missed me, that we should have lunch soon, that family was too important to let small things get in the way. Small things, as if erasing me on my birthday, shutting me out of their lives for years, was just a misunderstanding we could laugh about, now that I was someone worth knowing. Travis followed, inviting me to a family dinner. Vanessa even sent a message, all smiles and emojis, pretending like we'd always been close. But their sudden warmth felt cold to me. They hadn't reached out when I was alone, exhausted, and invisible. They only came back when there was something to gain. For the first time in my life, I didn't chase their love. I didn't rearrange my schedule, didn't beg for their approval, didn't rush to say yes. I let their messages sit unanswered, my phone buzzing on the table while I poured myself a glass of wine and looked out over a city that finally felt like it belonged to me. They were noticing me now, but they were far too late. Not long after I became a partner, I sat down to write my will. It was the first time in my life I thought seriously about what would happen when I was gone. Not because I feared death, but because I wanted to choose what my life would leave behind. For decades, everything I owned, everything I worked for, was meant for my children. Even when they treated me like I was nothing, I held on to the dream that one day they'd see my sacrifices and be grateful. But now I understood the truth. They only saw me when there was something to take. I met with my lawyer, a kind woman who didn't ask questions when my voice trembled. Together, we set it all down on paper. My house, my savings, my shares in the company I had helped build. Almost every cent would go to scholarships for young Black women trying to rise from the same kind of invisible struggle I had endured my whole life. Girls who reminded me of myself, the ones nobody believed in until they proved everyone wrong. To Travis and Madeline, I left only enough to close the door quietly. Nothing cruel, just a final, undeniable truth in ink. My love was a gift they had thrown away long before money was ever in question. Weeks later, they invited me to another dinner, trying once more to stitch up years of silence with hollow smiles. I went, not for reconciliation, but for closure. I sat at their table, listening as they spoke about my success like they had been part of it, as if my blood, sweat, and tears were theirs to claim. I smiled politely, said little, and when they hugged me goodbye, I felt no ache, no longing, just peace. Because I knew something they didn't. The story they had tried to erase had been written anew without them. My justice wouldn't come in shouting matches or slammed doors. It would come years from now, long after I was gone, when they read my will and finally understood that love, once betrayed, doesn't come back just because there's money on the table. And for the first time in my life, I walked away from my family's house feeling light. I had nothing left to lose, and everything I had built now belonged to a future they would never touch. If you've listened this far, maybe you felt what I felt. The sting of giving everything to people who can't see you. The heartbreak of realizing that blood doesn't always mean love. I used to think that my worst depended on my children's approval, on my family's acceptance. But now I know better. Love is a gift, not a debt. And when people show you over and over that they cannot hold your heart with care, you are allowed to take it back. You are allowed to stop bleeding for those who never offered you a bandage. I lost decades trying to earn a place at a table where I was never welcome. But in the end, I built my own table. And at that table, I've saved seats for those who know the value of a mother's love, for those who understand loyalty, kindness, and gratitude. Some call what I did revenge. I call it truth. My silence, my distance, my final choice. That wasn't anger. It was freedom. It was my way of saying, you can't erase me anymore. So to anyone listening who feels invisible, overlooked, discarded, let me tell you this. Your life is not over because they walked away. Sometimes the greatest justice you can give yourself is to stop knocking on closed doors and start building your own kingdom from the ashes they left behind. And when they finally notice you, when they try to come back, it won't matter anymore because you'll already know you were enough all along.